Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Iowa City Public Library. In today's program, 100 years of homecoming at the University of Iowa. Well, 100 years of homecoming, because it goes without saying that it's the University of Iowa. And we're really excited here today to have David McCartney, who is the university archivist, and he works in the University of Iowa Library's Special Collections and University Archives. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that when the meat of our program is over. David has been the university archivist for 12 years, and I'm going to turn the program over to him, and we'll have time for questions when he's finished.
Thank you very much, Mae. Thank you. Good afternoon. As Mae mentioned, we're going to talk a bit about a century of homecoming, and I can't help but note that if any of you are friends of Maeve on Facebook, you know about the Nellie on a Bench photo series, which I believe we're approaching image number 100 pretty soon. And we're at 98 will be uploaded tonight, so we'll be looking forward to that very, very soon. Nellie, by the way, is Maeve's dog, but what kind?
She's a yellow lab.
Yellow lab, and a very elegant one, I might add. Well, speaking of 100, we're going to talk for a few minutes about 100 years of homecoming here at the University of Iowa. And by homecoming, I'm going to refer to the annual fall tradition of the football game. Homecoming to us, of course, in a very general sense, means reunion, reattachment, reacquainting, and that happens to all of us at different times in different settings. But for the next few minutes, we're going to talk specifically about the experience that we have every fall, that we've had since 1912. The first homecoming in the sense of college experience, we believe, happened at the University of Illinois in 1910. The University of Illinois Alumni Association was aware of large numbers of alumni from their institution who had perhaps been a part of that first cohort that graduated over 50 years before at Champaign-Urbana. And the idea spread quickly, especially throughout the Midwest. It was picked up very quickly here at the University of Iowa. At the time, it was known as the State University of Iowa, and legally, we still technically are known as the State University of Iowa. That name changed in 1964. But the idea of hosting an annual homecoming for alumni stems from the philosophy that alumni organizations were developing at that time to encourage former students and alumni to return to their alma mater at a set time of year. And fall seemed to be an appropriate time, perhaps a few weeks after the new students arrive, and also a time to perhaps showcase the campus when classes are at their peak. Our first homecoming here at Iowa City was held on November 23rd, 1912, and we hosted the Wisconsin Badgers football team. I regret to report that we did lose that first game. I won't tell you the score. However, I will tell you that we have done pretty well over the years. We have a tally now of 54, 40, and 5. 5 games that ended in ties. So over the past century, we've had pretty good success, actually, with our homecoming football games. We're going to take a look at some images up here on the screen for a few minutes, and I'll talk a little bit about how these types of symbols come to represent the experiences of homecoming here at Iowa. We have some early photographs that come from the Frederick Kent collection. Fred Kent was a very prolific photographer. He was the university's first official photographer and served the university for over 50 years. He documented much of the activity on campus over the course of a half century, beginning in the early 1900s. And so many of the images that you're going to be seeing today come from the Frederick Kent collection at the University Archives. Here's a scene from a homecoming parade. We don't know exactly where it was taken. It may have been downtown or near downtown, and you can tell from the sign that they are particularly concerned about Ames. I don't know if we were playing Iowa State that particular year, but Minnesota is noted as well. And parades were pretty modest, but very exuberant affair. This is another scene from the same parade. This is Market Street. We're looking kind of west-northwest on Market from Gilbert. And I don't have a pointer, unfortunately, but if you look off to, sorry, I'm going to step away for just a moment. Right up there, that square tower off to the left of the screen is Old Brick. And the very large building that you see in the foreground is a brewery that has since been destroyed. That brewery occupies what is now a parking lot and the Bluebird Diner, the northwest corner of Market and Gilbert Street. So this is a parade scene in 1917. By today's standards, they're marching the wrong way on a one-way street, but I think back in 1917 they didn't mind too much. But that's Old Brick in the background, and that's the only landmark that I was really able to refer to get a fix on the actual location of where this was taken. I'm wearing my 2012 badge today for the Centennial, and you can get yours at a number of places around town right now for only a couple of bucks a piece. Badges have been a part of the homecoming tradition for a very long time. Not necessarily from the beginning. They didn't begin actually until about 1924, when they were manufactured for the first time as a fundraising tool to help pay for homecoming-related activities. But the badge on the left is an early team badge. This was something that the football team did for itself as commemorative of the season, and that is the 1912 Hawkeye football team, the first year of homecoming. The badge you see on the right is the first quote-unquote official homecoming badge, and that was from October 25th of 1924. These come from the University Archives artifacts collection, and we just this past week scanned these badges. They're going to be available for your viewing online soon on our Flickr account, and I'll tell you in a little bit how you can access that on the internet. Here's some more badges from the 1920s. We don't have a complete set, unfortunately. We are missing a few years, so once we get those images online on our Flickr account, we are going to put out an appeal to folks to maybe dig through the attic or the basement, and if you have a badge or two that are extras from years that we don't have covered, we'd love to hear from you. The styles change year in and year out. You're going to see in a couple of minutes here, but you're going to find that there is, with very few exceptions, one common denominator: black and gold. Game programs are a big part of the memorabilia from not just homecoming, but of course any football Saturday. This is one of our earlier game programs that represent homecoming activity, and 1934, the Hawkeyes taking on the Golden Gophers up north. And I believe this might still predate Floyd of Rosedale. I can't quite remember the first year that the Floyd of Rosedale trophy competition began, but that's the game program cover from 1934. Wonderful artwork in these. Sometimes these were either handled through an advertising agency, or perhaps they were locally commissioned. I'm not sure about the source of this, but I love that image from 1937. We love parades, don't we? Here's a scene from the 1940s. This is the Hawkeye Marching Band, and we're looking at, well, I can't quite tell. I think this may be Clinton Street. Maybe some old-timer might be able to recognize the name of the store, the full store sign in the background, illuminated at night. But we can only get an approximate date of the 1940s decade for this particular image. This one we ran on the university's Facebook page. If you're a friend of the University of Iowa on Facebook, you might have seen this on Monday morning. Every Monday, the University Archives, in cooperation with the university, releases a photo from the vault. And this was our photo this past Monday. The reason I chose this particular image was I was trying to get a fix on the date for this image, and we asked folks if they could help us identify the year, make, and model of the car that these folks are riding in the parade on Clinton Street right in front of the University Bookstore as they're approaching Iowa Avenue. And the consensus is it's a 1950 Ford convertible. I can't recall what the model is, but we did establish that it was a Ford based on the styling. I love this image because it's just a great slice of a pretty exuberant moment. In the 1970s, here's a float under construction on the Pentecrest or near the Pentecrest. I'm not sure exactly where this is taking place. I'm not quite sure if that might be perhaps in a downtown alley. If anybody can again help us identify where that's located, we'd appreciate knowing about that. But this was taken in 1971 at a time when the homecoming interest was kind of drifting off. There was, as you know, during that period, a very great deal of political activity on campus. There was a lot of unrest and a lot of lagging interest in traditions. But despite that, homecoming never really ceased to exist. It continued in some fashion consistently year after year. We're going to look at a few homecoming badges again. I showed you a few samples from the 1920s. The ones I'm about to show you have different messages, different symbolism types, different kinds of artwork. And they're fascinating to look at individually because each year there seems to be a different message to convey. 1936 is just a very classic image of one of the buildings on the Pentecrest. Sometimes individuals are profiled. This is from the storied 1939 season of the Ironmen season, in which Niall Kinnick made scored the winning touchdown run just a few weeks before against Notre Dame. I'm not sure actually who the man is depicted here. He does not necessarily resemble Niall Kinnick, but it could be him. But we don't have any further information about that. Perhaps there might be a collector who can give us some more insight into that. 1941, this is a very heroic image that was released just a few weeks before the outbreak of U.S. involvement in World War II. And the very brave, very heroic hawk takes center stage, and it's a really wonderful design. During World War II, the availability of metal was very, very limited. The government rationed many commodities and products and raw materials, including certain types of metal. And in 1943, and this was the only year it happened, the homecoming badge was made out of cut cardboard. And we do have one in our collection. These are, I'm assuming, quite rare because simply because cardboard is not a very durable type of material. So we're very, very pleased to have this on hand. But it's, again, a pretty interesting statement of the times, the scarcity of resources. But still, on the home front, people want to continue to observe the tradition. And so they did it in a way that still respected the national sacrifice that was underway at the time. 1947 was our centennial year of the University of Iowa, or excuse me, the State University of Iowa, and that's what the badge looked like that year. I had to include this one. This is the new library in 1951. That's where I work, and this is the north entrance as it appeared at the time the building was opened back in 1951. So sometimes the badges would commemorate significant campus events that year. They might either memorialize or pay tribute to an individual, or there might be some other type of symbolism. 1953, any guesses as to who that man is? That's Forrest Abishevsky, right? Evie. He was coach of the Hawkeyes. Thank you. He was coach of the Hawkeyes for much of the 1950s, and his last season as coach was 1960. Arguably the best team in the country never to make it to a bowl game. Iowa in 1960 under Evie ranked second nationally, yet they still couldn't play in a bowl game because Minnesota took the co-championship of the Big Ten Conference that year, and Minnesota got to go to the Rose Bowl. Darn them. But Evie liked to say that he probably of all his seasons as a very successful coach here at Iowa, his favorite game was against Ohio State in that non-bowl game season of 1960. So that's Forrest Evashevsky, 1953. I bet you didn't know that Herky could play the bagpipes. At least in 1954 he did. This is a salute to the Scottish Highlanders, which for a very long time performed on campus. They were organized as a military, I think ROTC-related unit in 1936. During World War II, the Highlanders became an exclusively female organization because of the war. And it's pretty much stayed that way after World War II. Men began returning to the Highlanders after about 1970. And I believe the Highlanders continued to perform up until at least the decade of the 1980s. Unfortunately, due to budget cuts and waning interest, the Highlanders no longer are performing. But there was a 75-year reunion last year in 2011, which was a wonderful experience for those who could come back. Herky is entering the space age, 1958. This was a year after Sputnik. By this time, October of 1958, the University of Iowa was entering the space race because of James Van Allen's research. He was instrumental in moving forward with the Explorer 1 and 2 and subsequent missions in the Explorer series. So Herky got in on the act, and the homecoming badge for 1958 reflected that as well. Here he is studying hard, 1960. I love that look of determination on his face. He's going to ace that exam no matter what. You may recognize this gentleman. This is Virgil Hancher. In 1963, he announced his retirement after 23 years of service as president of the State University of Iowa. He actually stepped down the following year, 1964, and was succeeded by Howard Bowen. But as a tribute to President Hancher's legacy, the homecoming badge for 1963, his last full year as university president, was issued. Whoever said Iowa State University should have a monopoly on corn? Well, we certainly don't agree with that. I think Iowa should get in on the corn as well. So in 1970, that came to symbolize the homecoming badge as well. Now, in 1972, you know, I said a few minutes ago that the homecoming tradition had been continued unbroken here since 1912. Technically, in 1972, the events of that week were not called homecoming. I'm not quite sure what the story was behind that. I would have to dig into the homecoming committee records and the archives to see if there might be some evidence to suggest what was going on that year. But instead of homecoming, they called it Old Capitol Week. And so the badge for that year indicates that or reflects that sentiment. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the artist, but this was a locally commissioned work designed for specifically Old Capitol Week. But if you go to the game programs from that same year, this is the game program that was issued. And if you look at the bottom of that image of the brand new Hancher Auditorium lobby, you see in very, very tiny lettering the word homecoming. And it almost looks as though somebody tried to sneak that word in, perhaps a bit subversively, to make sure that we remembered it as a homecoming event. I may be speculating a lot on this. I don't know really what happened, but there's some evidence that indeed we had homecoming in 1972. I think it's safe to say that we did. Moving up into the 1980s, here's a stylized turkey I've never seen before, not before or since, but that's from the 1985 theme of Gold Rush. And up into the 90s, Not many badges actually deviated much from the circular design, but in 1993, I think for the first time, a square shape was used in the badge design. And here's the current one from 2012. I mentioned game programs. Sometimes they're quite a story in and of themselves. I don't know quite what's going on here, and I think the artist wants us to perhaps speculate that something may be happening, that we can perhaps create our own storyline. This is the 1948 program, and I really found not only the artwork quite lovely, but if you look very, very carefully, just to the left of the word Iowa in the banner, I don't know if you can see it or not on the screen, but there is some very light pencil writing. Somebody wrote in that, as a way to remember that game that day, Dad and I went. I thought, well, that's kind of a sweet way to remember a very special memory. That was the 1948 homecoming game against Purdue. Dad and I went. 1953 program cover for the Indiana game. I mentioned that corn is not necessarily the exclusive domain of our friends at another institution. We traffic in corn here at Iowa City as well. And for many, many years, beginning in at least in the period immediately following World War I, the College of Engineering began a tradition, students in the College of Engineering began a tradition of building a monument fashioned with corn cobs, different varieties of corn, different colors, different hybrids and varieties. And each year, every fall for homecoming, a group of engineering students would design and build a corn monument that would be prominently displayed in the Penncrest area or downtown someplace. Usually, often, I don't know about usually, but often at the corner of Gilbert and Iowa, which seems to be a pretty central location. And this particular image from the Kent collection was taken in 1922. Not every year, but some years, the custom was that if Iowa won the game, there would be a massive bonfire of the monument. So all that work would go up in flames, sadly. But corn can only last so long, I guess. Each year they had different designs. This is an obelisk from 1927. The 1929 monument, you can see the Penncrest in the background, and I believe, well, the old Capitol is obliterated here, but I believe we're on Clinton Street, looking to the west, but I'm not positive of that. 1932. They're pretty elaborate, and if you look carefully, you can see rows of lights, electrical lights installed on the edges. At night, they would illuminate this. So electrical engineers got in on the act. 1942, there's influence of wartime patriotic theme in that design. I'm not sure, but I think in the background that would be either St. Mary's or the Congregational Church spire. I'm thinking Congregational Church, and we may be looking north on Clinton, but I'm not positive. There used to be a smaller, I think Unitarian church, if I'm not mistaken, at the northeast corner of Clinton and Iowa Avenue, and that would be the building to the right center in front of that spire. But I'm not, sorry not to be so certain about the placement of some of these images, but that's what I can gather from that anyway. And the Penncrest, of course, to the left. 1945, again, versus Wisconsin. And again, not taken too far from the Penncrest. And more recent times, this is, still about 35 years ago, 1978. Here's a monument that is still under construction in front of Old Cap. We can't celebrate without royalty. Here's one quote from the the 1960s. Unfortunately, this photograph is not labeled very well. We don't know the year, nor do we know the names of these young ladies. But this was a court, judging from the hairstyles, would probably be mid-1960s. Music everywhere. There were dances, of course, at homecoming. Local band is performing. This is about 1950 at the Iowa Memorial Union. And the year before, in 1949, couples, if they chose, could have their picture taken at a special staging area before going out onto the dance floor. And I think more than once we've had the theme Gold Rush as our homecoming theme. I noticed it in one of the 1980s era buttons, and we see it here in 1949. Now, I'm closing out with one particular game that, we went through dances, parades, corn monuments, badges. What does that leave? Oh, yeah, games. Here's a ring toss game, 1940s style. We don't know quite where this was, whether it was perhaps a fundraiser for a sorority. But again, this is from the Frederick Kent collection. And we don't know if he made the shot or not, but we can hope that he did. I'll be happy to answer any questions or hear comments from you about your own homecoming memories. If you would like, we can open it up for a few minutes. I want to mention a couple of things to you. We're going to go to a film in a couple of minutes that I'll mention briefly. I also wanted to bring your attention to handouts that we have over here off to the side. First being a resource guide that the University Archives has on its website. There is a printed version of this, but you can also find it online if you just Google University of Iowa Archives and click on the link that says Search and Find Resources. You'll find a guide to the homecoming tradition available, and it'll tell you about the holdings that we have in the University Archives, including records of the Homecoming Committee, which date back to the beginning, 1912, to photographs, many of which you've seen today here, the badge collection, game programs, yearbooks, all kinds of good stuff. Another handout I wanted to mention to you is the Spectator column that I write. A couple of years ago, I wrote a column specifically about homecoming for the Spectator. The column is called Old Gold, and if you are interested, you may take a copy of that. It gives you a bit more background information about the origins of the homecoming tradition here. Everybody needs a bookmark. We're at the library today, so make sure you take one of our bookmarks as well when you leave today. Finally, I wanted to tell you a bit about songbook. I'm a former percussionist, and so I'm not really able to read notes, but I can kind of get the sense of the pacing of this, and it sounds suspiciously a bit like the Iowa Corn Song, which was written at about the same time. But Three Cheers for Iowa looked like a sweet melody that you may want to try out on your piano at home tonight. It was composed in 1918, and it just seems like a very nice rousing cheer for dear old SUI. Before we go to the film, and before I tell you about the film, I'll be happy to entertain any questions. Maeve has the microphone, and if you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
What was the last year that the Corn Monument was constructed on campus?
The last year that what? I'm
The
sorry?
Corn Monument?
I know that it continued into the 1980s. It was revived for a while then, but we really don't have any record of it after 1990 that I'm aware of, anyway. But it's the type of tradition that seems to see a resurgence every few years, so perhaps it may return again. Who knows?
I think it ought to, because I graduated in 79, so I have a memory of this vague memory of the Corn Monument, because you would have walked by it while they were building it. But I think it's a wonderful thing. Of course, we probably wouldn't be able to burn it anymore. We would have to win the game, too, to burn it as well. But I have a question about the collection. So these are pulled from all different parts of
Yes.
special collections, or I imagine that the minutes of the homecoming committee must be in the archives as opposed to the special collections. Are they together? How does that?
The minutes of the homecoming committee are in their own collection. It's called the Records of the Homecoming Committee, and they span 1912 to about 1996. We don't have anything more recent than that, yet, at least. But that's a separate collection. The other materials that you saw, the photographs, are culled from a much larger collection of photographs under Fred Kent's name. The homecoming badges are part of a larger collection of artifacts. It's kind of a sub-collection within that particular artifacts collection. So we don't really have a homecoming collection as such. What we do is identify which collections scattered throughout the university archives that contain information about or pertaining to homecoming in some fashion. Another example would be the UI student government records. UISG in and of itself is not all about homecoming, but they certainly each year, at least historically, have approved some funding for homecoming activities. And so there will be some evidence of it in that collection as well.
And the programs, where would they have come from?
That's within our athletics, Department of Athletics collection. We have a whole series devoted to game programs, and those are arranged by season. We don't have a complete set there, but we do have quite a few from past seasons. And so we, in going through and making selections for the talk today, I tried to identify, okay, what were the homecoming game dates? Do we have the program for that particular day, and then pulled them out from there.
So if just a casual user, someone who is interested in homecoming, were to come to Special Collections and say, I want to see everything you have on homecoming, it's not just coming from a couple of boxes. They'd have to.
It'll be from across a number of different collections. And that's why the resource guide is handy. If you go either to our website and look through the resource guide, you can browse through that, or pick up the hard copy today. It'll give you information about those different collections, and if there's something in particular that you're interested in, you can certainly take a look. Yes?
You mentioned that there were some years you don't have homecoming memorabilia from. Do you have sort of a wish list or something on your website that people could go to if they have relatives who have closets full of this stuff?
We ought to, and I appreciate your asking that. In fact, we will have a wish list soon for our homecoming badge collection, because we are missing some years for that. The collection is not online yet, at least as of this taping, but we expect in the next week or two for it to go live on the university's Flickr account. And if you go into Flickr and perhaps do a search for University of Iowa homecoming badges, you may find our online collection that way. And we are going to put out an appeal for that. And yes, we will identify, either we'll identify the missing years, or we'll just ask our visitors to make a note of any missing years that they might have. As far as game programs go, we're working on that now. We're working with the athletic department, in fact, because they do have a pretty substantial collection of their own game programs that they are thinking of transferring to us. And if that works out, we'd be delighted to receive those to help fill in those gaps. But as far as the wish list goes, we are going to have one out soon for the homecoming badges. Any other questions, comments? We have a movie. It's 11 minutes long. It's a way to get us into the homecoming spirit, and I'll tell you a little bit about this before we actually roll it. About a week and a half ago, the University Archives, in cooperation with the Center for Media Production here at the University of Iowa, identified several football game films that are specific to homecoming, and we uploaded a half dozen of these films from our collection just in time for the homecoming centennial, and they are online now. If you go to the university's YouTube account, you can find them. If you log on to youtube.com/University of Iowa, or youtube.com/user/University of Iowa. It'll take you to the university's homepage on YouTube. And from there, you'll see a number of categories on the left side of your screen, one of which is the historical channel. And that's where we are uploading content from the archive's audiovisual holdings. And we had digitized earlier some half-dozen football game films that, as it turns out, were homecoming games. But we also digitized one film in particular that we thought was particularly special, and that's an 11-minute film that was commissioned by the university back in 1949 called The Theme of the Black and Gold. This is a particularly remarkable film because it includes highlights of Hawkeye games from as early as 1921. We do not have currently, or these days in the university archives, we don't have any film footage from prior to 1936. That's the earliest that we have on hand in our holdings. I don't know what happened to the earlier films. Perhaps at some point they might have been destroyed after being copied over, because at one time film was made of nitrate. Nitrate is a very combustible material, and it's very dangerous to store. And so at some point, thankfully, somebody made copies of the 2 or 3 1920s era films and incorporated segments of those into this 1949 compilation. It's the best and really only available footage that we have of Duke Slater. And it also includes footage of Niall Kinnock's scoring touchdown run in 1939 against Notre Dame. An amazing game, and that's a game that remains in the record books as one of the finest hours for Hawkeye football. So we're going to watch now The Theme of the Black and Gold. It's as I said, released in 1949, but it does not have anything from that season, but it does have highlights of some Hawkeye football seasons leading up to that time.
Iowa's 1948 football season is recent enough so that many of you will remember this play from the Wisconsin game when Ralph Doran ran 50 yards for an Iowa touchdown. In the same game, DeMarco passed in the end zone to Dittmer. And in the 1948 Iowa-Minnesota game, this surprise play, a long pass by Fask instead of DeMarco to Dittmer, was a highlight of the game. But let's turn the pages of Iowa football history back half a century. These athletic awards are evidence of honors won by Iowa's athletic greats. The near greats have only memories of victories snatched away by a split-second margin when victory faded from their grasp. Let's look into the stories behind these awards and begin when football was only a youngster in age, but a game of strenuous activity and bruising play. Outstanding players on the 1899 team were Clyde Williams, Edson, Howell, and Waters. Coach Knipe introduced a new style of play in 1899, and his Iowa team, with Maury Eby, a brilliant performer, shared the conference title. Stubb Stewart was Iowa's first 9-letter man in 1907, 8, and 9. In 1911, Willis O'Brien drop-kicked field goals of 50 yards and more. In 1916, Howard Jones took over as head football coach, and Iowa's trip to football glory really began. Waddy Davis on the 1917 team, known as a drop kicker, was also a great ball carrier. 1921, the team that brought Iowa national honors. It was a team of greats. The Devines, Lott, Duke Slater, Shuttleworth, Kadeski, Belding, Minnick, and Johnny Held. Here's history in motion. The 1921 crowd at the Iowa-Indiana game of that year. Haven't styles changed in 28 years? These were the first football training films made in the Western Conference. Captain Aubrey Devine kicks off to Indiana in the white helmets, which led to a 41-0 victory for the Hawkeyes. Chet Meade and George Thompson are in there making the tackle. Here's the famous A. Devine to G. Devine pass play. Gordon Lott drives through for the first touchdown. At this homecoming halftime ceremony, the parents of Aubrey and Glenn Devine were presented a life-size picture of Aubrey, a gift from hundreds of his admirers. Colonel Mumma made the presentation. In the second half, the Devine combination comes through for another long game. Swivel-hipped Aubrey Devine skirts left end in this game, brought back from the pass. In 1923, Howard Jones left Iowa for the Southern Conference. Dr. Fiesler on right was team physician. In the 1933 Iowa Northwestern game at Evanston, Joe Laws sparked the Hawks to a 7-0 victory. Laws was elected the most valuable player in the Big Ten and received All-American honors. The next year at Northwestern, Ozzie Simmons, a new sophomore star, stepped into the spotlight and helped Iowa win 20-7. In this play at Illinois in 1935, Simmons picked up 21 yards, but he's finally snowed under by Illinois tackler. Dick Crane, a well-remembered Iowa star, scores from the 3-yard line. The ball is taken by Lamb, who goes off tackle. Then laterals to Simmons to set up a 19-0 win for Iowa. When 1939 rolled around, Iowa had a new coaching staff: Anderson, Iridio, and Harris. This was the year of the famed Iron Men, with Passy as captain, and Niall Kinnick, the nation's outstanding All-American. Indiana was the first conference opponent in '39, and the Iron Men already showed signs of what was to come with runs like this one by Kinnick. Kinnick takes a handoff from Coupe for the first touchdown of the game. In this play, Green scores from the 3. Final score, 32-29, Iowa. Here's a familiar scene at the Iowa Stadium with the band of the world-famous Scottish Highlanders providing pre-game entertainment. It's the 1939 Notre Dame game with the never-to-be-forgotten 7-6 Iowa victory. 45,000 spectators jam the stands awaiting the kickoff. Iowa receives, and Kinnick makes a nice return. Here's the Iowa winning touchdown. Watch that touchdown play again as Kinnick plows through for that all-important score. Iowa's great All-American will long be remembered as a scholar, an athlete, and a gentleman. At South Bend in 1940, Notre Dame had the ball on Iowa's 12-yard line. Notre Dame fumbles, and big Mike Enoch grabs the pigskin in midair, and he's away for a long run to set up the winning score. From the 2-yard line, Bill Green scores the touchdown, which meant an Iowa victory, 7-0. In the 1942 Wisconsin game, this pass, Farmer to Burkett, kept Wisconsin from the title because Iowa won 6-0. The Gophers came to Iowa City in 1945. Here, Nelson Smith cut through center for the first touchdown. Iowa's third touchdown was made on this screen pass from Jerry Niles to Nelson Smith to cinch an Iowa victory over the Gophers, 20-19. 1946 saw Iowa beat Purdue 16-0. Tunnell on a fake pass easily skirts left end for a touchdown. Tunnell, known as Emlyn the Gremlin, repeats his earlier tally, driving hard over the goal line. In the 1947 Indiana game, Al DeMarco became a threat with his accurate passes. Watch DeMarco elude the tacklers while picking out Tunnell far down the field to receive his pass. After this game, Iowa fans praised the DeMarco-Tunnell combination. DeMarco and Tunnell click again, and Iowa outclassed Indiana 27-14. The Minnesota game of 47 provided the football upset of the year. In the third quarter, Iowa was touchdown bound. DeMarco's pass found Herb Shaner for a 25-yard gain. Later, on Minnesota's 5-yard line, DeMarco found Shaner again, and Floyd of Rosedale came home to Iowa 13-7. We've covered 50 years of Hawkeye football history, and we're up to 1949. There's Coach Eddie Anderson at work with some of his 1949 squad. Fall football practice is on. Looks like Dr. Anderson has some visitors.
Eddie, the boys seem to be working hard.
Well, they are, Paul. That's our biggest hope, of course, you know.
Quite a schedule your Iowa squad is facing this fall, isn't it, Eddie?
Yes, it's a real one, Paul. I think it's by far the most attractive home schedule we've ever had. It isn't every year that we'll be so fortunate to have the Rose Bowl champs like Northwestern out here in Iowa City. I understand, too, that they're going to be even stronger than last year. Then we have two other fine opponents from the conference, Illinois and Indiana, along with Oregon. As you know, they were co-champions of the Pacific Coast Conference last year with California. And then we have an opening engagement here at home with UCLA. I think you recall what they did to us 2 years ago out there, and we're hoping that we can make a little better contest out of it this year.
The next time you watch a team of inspired Iowa boys on this field, remember the hundreds whose names are forgotten in the years gone by. That same fighting spirit for the fame of the black and gold will be there this year, as every year, for that's what makes football everybody's game.
Any questions? There'll be a quiz, and oh, no, there won't be. Thank you all very much for coming today. Appreciate your interest, and go Hawkeyes.
Thank you.